Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Ahmed for Eduonix and this is Vagrant Essentials, build portable environments. In the previous lecture we have seen how virtualization has dramatically changed the lives of many developers, added new features to the software development lifecycle, and aided a lot of developers quickly build and test their applications. But at the end of the lecture we have seen that was even not enough in our fast-paced changing world of frameworks and technologies for software development and for application development. We said that we needed an automation mechanism where the developer can avail the required infrastructure for the application to be deployed, and this has to be done as quickly as possible. So automation technologies have risen, among which is Docker and Vagrant. Now, if you look up the word Vagrant on dictionary.com, you will find the following definition: a person who wanders about idly and has no permanent home or employment. And that is exactly what Vagrant is. It has no home, it has no underlying operating system, it can work on virtually any operating system that is supported, and it supports a lot of operating systems. At least it supports the major distros of Linux, the modern versions of Windows, and of course the Mac OS X. But what is Vagrant? Vagrant is a tool that uses virtualization to build complete development environments. It automates infrastructure tasks that developers used to waste precious time on. When using Vagrant, you save yourself the time and effort of doing the following. So the following is what Vagrant saves you from having to manually do it. Create a virtual machine regardless of the underlying operating system. And of course we have just mentioned that it's deriving its name from this property, which is that it can work on any operating system. The second thing is that it configures the virtual machine resources automatically. So for example, it was gonna set the required CPU, memory, network for you. You don't have to manually set these. It also avails shared folders between the host machine and the virtual machine so that you can work with the application files and have your changes directly reflected in the hosted application. So no longer have to edit your files manually and then FTP or SFTP those files to your remote host. You can directly work on a shared folder or on a shared directory that is between your host, between you and your virtual machine. So whatever changes you make to the application will be instantly reflected on the running application. So of course that means that your changes will take a lot less time to be deployed and reflected on the application. Next, it assigns the correct host name to the machine, and nearly every software is relying somewhere or another on the host name of the machine to be correctly set. So Vagrant takes care of this for you. It assigns the correct host name to the machine, it boots up the machine, and it deploys the software on your machine using a script or a configuration management system like, for example, Chef or Puppet. If you have worked with these configuration management systems before, they are just systems that automate configuration and software deployment, and they do a lot of amazing other things. You can use Chef or Puppet if you have experience with them, or you can just create a custom script where you will deploy the application on the virtual machine. As you can see here, it automates everything from creating the machine, configuring its resources, assigning the shared folders and the host name, booting up the machine, and even deploying your software on the machine or your application on the machine. So for example, if you have a web application and you need to test it quickly on a different machine than the one that you're working on, perhaps on another developer's machine, you want to show it to somebody else, and instead of sending the recipient a long email detailing all the prerequisites that need to be installed where the application is going to be deployed, you can just hand him or her a Vagrant image, and with a few mouse clicks or keystrokes, the machine is up and running with all the prerequisites availed and also the application deployed and running. But if you are a DevOps engineer, you sure have worked with Docker or at least heard about Docker. But if you haven't, Docker is a container-based solution for delivering applications bundled with their infrastructure. It does the same thing, or nearly the same thing that Vagrant does. It bundles the application with its underlying infrastructure, and it gives you something called a container where you can just run this container, double click on it, or just launch it from the command line, and you have a fully working application. One of its strong points is that it requires less overhead on the system resources than virtualization-based solutions, among which Vagrant is. So if you are using a container-like system like Docker, it will not use resources as extensively as a virtualization-based solution will, like Vagrant. And that is of course a strong point because of the way container-based solutions work. However, container-based solutions utilize the host's system kernel to do its work. So when deploying a Docker container to another machine, it should be having a similar kernel for the container to work. In other words, a container that was built on Linux cannot be run on a Windows or a Mac OS X machine. So of course this is one of the weak points of container-based applications, among which Docker is, which is that you cannot deploy your application on virtually all operating systems like Vagrant does. You will have to deploy your application on an operating system that has the same kernel as the machine where the container was built on. So you can deploy a Docker container from one Linux machine to another, but you cannot deploy a Docker application from a Linux machine to a Windows machine. But of course, using Docker over Vagrant or using Vagrant over Docker is not a matter of preference. We're not here saying that Docker is better than Vagrant or that Vagrant is better than Docker. And this is also not a matter of personal preference. This is a matter of the type and the requirements of the project you are working on. So the specific prerequisites of the project, the scope of the project, whether it's going to be deployed on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X, or is it just going to be deployed on one or two machines, both of them are running Linux. All this will dictate your choice whether you're going to use Docker or a container-based solution, or you are going to use Vagrant. Now, enough of discussion. We have discussed the theory, we've discussed the history of Vagrant, we have discussed what Vagrant does, what it doesn't, what's the difference between Vagrant and other similar purpose tools. Let's now start with Vagrant installation. And because that might take some time, let's leave it to the next lecture, so see you next.